Ladies and gentlemen, I am excited to announce that I will have the incredible opportunity to spend 3 days with none other than Samuel Beckett himself. All thanks to this remarkable trilogy. It is an immense honor, and I approach this encounter with deep respect and admiration. Stay tuned for the exciting journey that awaits us. Section 1. Molloy opens with an unidentified voice claiming, "I am in my mother's room. It is I who live there now. I don't know how I got there." 3. This nameless narrator proceeds to give some details regarding their circumstances, albeit continuing to express uncertainty as to their accuracy. They surmise that they must have got there by way of ambulance, and also wonder what their mother's name is, and also wonder what their mother's name is, and whether she is alive. There is a man that arrives every Sunday to give them money for writing pages, the purpose of which is to speak of the things that are left, say fishes goodbyes, finish debies, finish dying. They also express the desire to have a son, but simultaneously suggest that they might already have one by way of a chambermaid from a while ago. The narrator begins recounting seeing two figures named A and C that met on a deserted rural road. They stop, meet, and each one goes in their separate direction. The narrator, who at this point identifies as male, relays that he kept clue in his field of view, and that he wanted to follow him, to get to know him better, or to be less lonely himself. 7. He describes though he says he does not remember who exactly is, who as a slow-moving, cigar-smoking old man with a Pomeranian that follows him. The narrator writes he is unsure as to the veracity of the details surrounding A and C. Resolving that he must go see his mother, the narrator gets on a bicycle and begins to ride with his crutches attached to the cross, pedaling with one leg, relaying to the reader that he is, in fact, crippled. As he is biking, he begins to relay observations about his relationship with his mother, writing that they were like a couple of old cronies, sexless, unrelated, with the same memories, the same rancors, the same expectations. 13. She calls him Dan, even though that is not his name, though that might have been the name of his father. He writes that he calls her Mag, and suggests that part of the reason for that moniker is the embedded man in the name, stemming from the need to have a Mao, that is a mother, and to proclaim it audibly. 13. He also writes that she is deaf and implies that she wanted to abort him. Returning to the present, the narrator says that a policeman accosts him as he is riding his bicycle because his manner of riding is considered a violation of public decency. 16. The narrator tells him that he is resting, though this answer does not satisfy the policeman, who demands to see some identification papers. Not being able to produce any, the narrator is taken to the police station and in a moment of reflection finally remembers that his name is Molloy. A woman that Molloy thinks is a social worker offers him some tea, and after spending an afternoon at the station, Molloy is released and is told by the sergeant to behave better in the future. 20. Molly surmises that the police did not file any charges against him because whatever crimes he committed are not easily classifiable under the law. Section 2. Following the police incident, Molloy continues on his bicycle, encountering some gray donkeys and a boatman smoking from a pipe. He then pauses, lies down in a grassy ditch, and remembers the fact that he had set out to meet his mother at the beginning of this ending day, though acknowledges that he does not remember why. 23. After reflecting on the inscrutability of his own purpose and reasons for doing anything, he resolves to get out of the ditch despite the fact that he does not want to. How joyfully I would vanish there, sinking deeper and deeper under the rains. 23. Getting up, he encounters a shepherd and his dog and hears the bleating of sheep. Molloy expresses uncertainty as to how to get to his mother. He asks a passer by what the name is of the town they are in. He attributes his confusion regarding names and places to his sense of identity that was wrapped in a namelessness often hard to penetrate. 27. Molloy continues bicycling when he runs over a dog, despite the fact that it was near its owner, a woman, and on a leash. Molloy attempts to run away, but is confronted by a bloodthirsty mob of all sexes and ages. 28. The owner of the dog intervenes and says that despite the fact that Molloy did indeed kill her dog Teddy, she is not that heartbroken because she was on the way to the veterinarian to euthanize the dog, as Teddy was old and ridden with health problems. She forgives Molloy for attempting to run away and says that his running over the dog spared her the painful task of having to euthanize Teddy along with its expense. 28. Another sergeant appears, and seeing that the lady was not mad at Molly, he tells her to remove the dog from the street. Molloy tries to leave, but the woman, her name now revealed as Mrs. Loy, or Lousie, asks Molloy to help her bring the body of the dog back to her house and help her bury it. They get to Louse's house, and she buries the dog under a tree. Molloy says that he could not, due to his leg. Molloy thinks she will cry, but instead begins to laugh, though Molloy notes that he thinks he may not be able to tell the difference. They go into her dining room, and Louse offers him food and something to drink. Molloy notes that she kept up a chatter of which I did not understand the 100th part. 33. After describing Louse's parrot, whose speech mimicry only involves swearing, Molloy narrates that he fell asleep. He wakes up in a room and tries to leave, but finds that it is locked. Noting that he is missing his clothes and was probably washed and shaven, he wonders where he is and whether he is closer to his mother. Noticing the moon's movement from outside the window, Molloy begins to reflect on his past interests in astronomy, geology, and anthropology, particularly in terms of his attempt to form some understanding of the world, claiming that he has tried everything. He says that in the end, it was magic that had the honor of my ruins. 35. Musing on the instability of acquired knowledge and the impossibility of knowing anything, which he aligns with an exposition on his inability to tell apart the phases of the moon or even where it is in the sky, he says he had forgotten who he was and how much time has elapsed since he saw an ant see and decided to go see his mother. Section 3. The following day, Molloy asks the valet for his clothes, who tells him that they have been burnt, though Molloy later finds out that they have only been taken to the dyers. Molloy begins to knock over the furniture in the room with his crutches, to which the valet puts everything back in place. Eventually, the valet brings Molloy his clothes, though Molloy notes he is missing the pebble that he would suck on from his pocket, as well as some objects, despite not knowing what they were. 40. He declares he is missing a knife, to which the valet brings him a stainless steel vegetable knife. Molloy muses again on the fact that he feels a purposelessness in his actions, and a lack of sense regarding any principles he may have. Molloy goes downstairs and finds Louse fussing around her dog's grave in the garden. Molloy attempts to leave, but finds that his bicycle does not work, so he lies down in the grass. Lying down next to him, Louse proposes to let Molloy live in her house with her, as well as eat, drink, and smoke at no cost. She proposes, in essence, to let Molloy take the place of the dog he had killed, for tea, too. After Louse leaves, Molloy homes in on various sounds, for it was a night of listening. 44. He relays that his sensitive hearing makes it difficult for him to understand what others say, though also struggles to know what he himself is saying, which is why he is untalkative. 45. However, he acknowledges that such understanding is ultimately fruitless, and that he generally reacts and interacts without a desire of enlightenment. 45. Molloy implies that he should tell you, the reader, why he stayed so long with Laus, but admits that he cannot, while suggesting that there is nothing else he could do. Noting that he wishes to find his bicycle, which disappeared again, Molloy explains that there are two approaches to any desire, active and contemplative, the latter of which he prefers, despite the fact that both seem to give the same result. For 7. Molloy then says that he suspects that Laus kept adding poison to whatever drink she was giving him, while admitting that this claim is a grave charge to bring against her. 48. Even though he claims he did not feel different from this poison, he found himself bound in the air, something he says he never does, and occasionally collapsing. After musing on Laus's physical androgyny, he starts counting his one experience of true love, a woman named Ruth or Edith, a series of sexual encounters that involved her paying Molloy, though he expresses doubt as to whether Ruth or Edith is indeed a woman, and whether it is actually love. Returning to Laus, he narrates that he finally left her house, stealing some silver spoons and an object whose purpose he cannot identify. Slipping into a blind alley, Molloy reflects on the comfort of epistemic indecipherability. Peace enters in when one accepts that they will never know anything. 59. He wonders whether he is closer to his mother, but admits that this old concern regarding her whereabouts was abated somewhat by the silver he stole from Laus. Section 4. Wandering around on an empty road, Molloy reflects on several topics. One thing he muses on is the danger of being outside during the working day. He claims that morning is the time to hide due to the fact that it is the time for lynching by the ends of an unnamed threat, an anonymous threat from within society. 62. Molloy also wonders whether death is an option for him, but considers that it might be a worse state than the vicissitudes of existence. Next, Molloy ends up on a beach next to the seaside. After playing with some sand, he begins to lay out an array of sucking stones. 64. He goes through the various calculations to ensure that he sucks on 16 stones in sequence, without sucking on the same stone twice before the revolution is complete. He narrates a counting system based on rotating the stones out of his 4 pockets, but still finds it difficult to distinguish between them in order to ensure he does not go over the same one twice. The only perfect solution that could set his mind at peace would be to have 16 pockets, 68. Molloy admits that devising a method to be able to suck on stones in an orderly fashion was a bodily need, 68. Eventually, he throws away all of the stones but one. Though he notes he soon lost it, or perhaps even swallowed it. Molloy goes back inland to look for his town where his mother will be, but he finds that he has more difficulty walking. Not only does his stiff leg begin to hurt more, but his other leg begins to as well, presumably because he has been putting more weight on it for the sake of his impaired one. As a result, he begins to find it difficult to balance on his crutches. He ends up in a forest and begins ruminating on what he calls his weak points. 74. Though he mentions several physical infirmities, such as his stiff leg, his bunion feet, the arthritis in his wrists, the boils his mother gave him, he claims that none of these are his true weak points and claims, paradoxically, that his health is actually of an incredible robustness. 70. Finding protection under the trees in the forest, he eventually encounters a man, what Molloy calls a charcoal burner, based on the fact that he sees smoke somewhere. 78. Molloy says that this man asked him to share his hut, and presumes that the man must have been born in the forest and spent his whole life there. Molloy asks him the way out of the forest, but says that the man's answer confused him. Unexpectedly, and without a reason given, Molloy hits the man over the head with his crutch and continues to beat him after seeing he had not ceased to breathe. 78. Molloy continues on with his aim of exiting the forest to find his mother. Molloy continues to indicate obliquely that he is physically deteriorating. Soon, all he can do is crawl, so he begins to drag himself on the ground using his crutches on his belly, like a reptile. 84. He finally sees the towers and steeples of a town, though he says he knows it might not be his town. A voice tells him, "Don't fret, Molloy. We're coming." 85. The chapter ends with Molloy falling into a ditch, hearing the sounds of birds as he recalls the two travelers from the beginning, the sheep he encountered, and other scenes of 85. Section 5. Chapter 2 opens with the following words. It is midnight. The rain is beating on the windows. I am calm. All is sleeping. 87. This voice soon becomes Jacques Morin, an agent who also has a son also called Jacques Morin, an agent who also has a son also called Jacques, and he declares that he is writing a report. He begins to narrate the story of how he first heard of Molloy. It was a Sunday, and he was sitting in his garden, about to go to Mass, when his colleague Gaber arrives to give him an order to see Molloy. 87. Though Morin tells him he is uninterested in the job, he agrees to take the case on when he is told that their boss, Yudi, specifically requested him, the flattery of which appeals to Morin. The visit from Gaber causes Morin to miss Mass, and he finds out that his son went without him. Having missed the Mass, Morin naps and then goes on a walk where he passes by the church. He decides to go ask his pastor, Father Ambrose, if he can receive private communion. After some small talk, Morin returns home and eats Irish stew prepared by his housekeeper, Martha. Morin goes to nap, but is wrought by an anxiety, a feeling that his life was running out. I knew not through what breached 97. Soon after, without giving him an explanation, he tells his son that they must leave together, and that he must leave together, and that he must pack a set amount of clothes. His son asks him if he may bring his stamps along, to which Morin agrees to let him bring his smaller album that is filled with duplicate stamps. Morin converses with Martha about dinner, but decides to not tell her they are leaving until the last minute, for he does not wholly trust her. 99. He muses on his neighbors, the Elsner sisters, and their dog Zulu, to which he declares, I don't like men and I don't like animals. As for God, he is beginning to disgust me. 100. He begins to think about the vast organization that he is employed in, and about Gaber, making note of what Morin thinks is his paradoxical quality. As a messenger, his code was incomprehensible to everyone but himself. 102. Morin goes to the kitchen and sees Martha in her rocking chair, to which he recalls their disagreement about having it in the kitchen. Going to his son's room, he finds him hiding some of his valuable stamps in the album of duplicates that Morin granted him permission to take on the trip, Scolding him for disobeying, Morin takes away both albums. This upsets his son, who Morin leaves in his room to cool off. Going to his bedroom, Morin lies in bed for it. It is the place where he can best sense what course to follow away from the outer turmoil of the world. 105. He begins to think about Molloy, indicating that he already has some familiarity with him. Molloy, or Molos, was no stranger to me. 107. However, whether Morin knows him in reality is left unclear, as he says his lack of colleagues to talk to prevents him from knowing whether he invented Molloy, is Moran's way of referring to Molloy's mother, of which he says he is also familiar with, but was much less alive than her son, 107. Thinking about what knowledge he has of Molloy, Moran further intimates that he may be looking for multiple versions of him. He says there were 4 Molloys, one being the one that inhabited him, one being the one that inhabited him, one being Gaber's, one Udi's, and the real man of flesh and blood somewhere. After his reflections on Molloy, Moran goes down to eat dinner, a soup that Martha prepared. He realizes she knows that they are leaving and accuses his son of telling her. His son says he did not and refuses to eat, for he says he feels sick. Though Moran does not believe him, he gives his son an enema so that he may defecate to feel better. During the process, Moran feels his knee begin to hurt and asks his son to hand him the Iodex, a topical ointment for relief of muscle inflammation. Section 6. Returning to his room, Molloy sees his son's stamp albums on his desk and wonders whether his son snuck away some of his favorite stamps. He also wonders whether he should have relented to son's desire to keep his stamps, but he decides that such an action would undermine his parental authority. He puts sleeping powder in some milk and brings it to his son, who is already sleeping, but Moran wakes up and gives him the milk. Feeling restless and distracting himself from his mission to find Molloy, Moran thinks that there is something in his house that is keeping him from leaving. Eventually, he realizes that his house has nothing to do with the kind of nothingness in the midst of which a witch stumbled, but chooses to blame it anyway for a brief moment of factitious freedom. 116. After going about the house, Moran goes to his room and begins to pack clothes, even though he notes that he does not know how to prepare because he does not know where he is going. Moran muses on the embarrassment his son will be to him and then goes to wake him up, which causes his son to thrash and scream at being woken up. Eventually, his son wakes up and gets dressed, and Moran helps him put on his knapsack. They leave and enter the woods together, Moran expressing annoyance at his son's inability to find his way in the dark. He takes his son's hand and thinks that he wants him to walk like his father, apparently oblivious to everything, and in reality missing nothing. 123. The path being too narrow to have both of them walk side by side causes Moran to consider various solutions, whether his son should be in front, behind, or be tied by a rope to him. Moran narrates that he does not intend to relay the various adventures which befell them on the way to Molloy country, a place called Baliba. He also mentions that he lives in Turdi, a hub of Turdiba, 127-8. He says that Baliba was a marsh, a strangled creek which the slow gray tides emptied and filled, its uncultivated land with bogwood and weeds that Moran says the people use for the creation various knickknacks. 129. Moran and his son keep traveling, eating tinfoot and drinking water from the stream. He begins reflecting on his mission to find Molloy and expresses confusion at his instructions from Gaber, particularly what he is supposed to do with Molloy when he is found. He mentions a past case, the Yerk affair, which culminated after Morn destroyed his Tiepin. He also says he has never had to find a woman in his assignments, for Yudi did not have much interest in them. 130. 130. 1. One night, Moran wakes up from a strong pain in his knee. He expresses confusion as to whether this is the same knee that hurt him when he was giving his son an enema. Longing for a state of painless paralysis, Moran fantasizes about a state where he would not be able to move, speak, hear, remember, but still capable of dreading death like a regeneration. 135. Considering what to do in case his leg worsens, he asks his son to go purchase a bicycle from the nearest village. After discussing whether it should be new or secondhand, and squabbling about money, his son goes off, and Moran sits alone in their shelter. Out of restlessness, he masturbates and paces around the shelter, thinking it might help the pain in his leg. He also wonders why he did not tell his son about his problem, and thinks that on some level he was glad that he was not well. In the evening, Moran sees a man, a foreigner, who asks him for some bread. Initially rejecting the sardines Moran offers him, the man repeats his request for bread, so Moran goes into his shelter and finds some bread to give him. Eventually, the man leaves, and Moran lights a fire so that his son will be able to find him in the dark when he returns. Section 7. After lighting the fire, Moran thinks about his impaired knee and decides to fashion a stick to help him walk. Realizing the knives with his son, he decides to use their umbrella as a walking aid instead. He climbs up to a knoll and imagines he is seeing his son returning from the trip. Moran ruminates on various things, particularly on his diminishing food supply. He again tries to remember what he is supposed to do with Molloy when he finds him. He finds himself turning away from these missing instructions in the depths of his memory, towards other unknowns. 143. Moran says that he should relay an incident that occurred before he continues on with his report. On the evening of the second day, Moran was sitting by the fire, waiting for his son to return. A man appeared and came right up to Moran, startling him by putting his hand on his shoulder. Moran relays that the darkness prevented him from seeing this dim man clearly, but from what he could see, he was displeased by the fact that the man's face resembled his own. 144. A conversation that ensues between them. The man asks Moran what he is doing in the woods and whether he has seen an old man with a stick pass by. Caught in an unfathomable terror, Moran killed him and claims, "I'm sorry to say I cannot indicate more clearly how this result was obtained." 140. How this result was obtained. Moran drags his dead body to his shelter, noting that he no longer resembled him. 146. Dissembling the camp, Moran collects all of his belongings after searching and finding his keys. He moves to a nearby location and falls asleep. Moran asks himself several questions to kill time, though he notes that the questions and answers were separated by prolonged intervals of time and may not have occurred in the way he describes. 148. His son returns with a bicycle, and after much struggling to secure themselves and their belongings onto it, they eventually succeed and get to Beliba. Again, he asserts that he will not relay the obstacles they encountered, but claims that it took weeks. Moran sees a shepherd and his sheep, and has a vision of the distant glow of the stars reaching the end of their life until they suddenly go out. 153. Claiming that he and his son got into some sort of argument, Moran simply relays that the following day he found himself alone. After some reflections on his son, the small amount of money he has left, and the punishments he will incur from Yudi for not being able to get to Molloy, Moran notes that Gaber comes to him in the forest. Gaber relays Yudi's message that Moran should return home. Moran begins his journey home, albeit slowly, due to his infirmities. Along the way, he asks himself certain questions of a theological nature, and he produces a list of 17 of these questions. 160. 1. Fee, however, does not answer these questions, and instead turns his attention to the mysterious way that bees dance, which he says are controlled by determinants of which I had not the slightest idea. Something he says he will never understand wondering that it may be too noble ever to be sullied by the cogitations of man. 163. After describing the further deterioration of his body, Moran meets a farmer and asks him whether he knows the way to the Turdy Madonna, but the farmer tells him he will never get there. 167. Noting that it is now summertime, Moran gets home and finds that his bees and hens have died. He gets 2 letters, one from Savory that says his son is doing well, and another from Udy asking for a report. Father Ambrose visits Moran, but Moran says that he told him not to count on him anymore. 169. Finally, Moran narrates that a voice was telling him to write a report. He goes into his house and writes. It is midnight. The rain is beating on the windows. It was not midnight. It was not raining. 170.